The Sandy and Toddcast is a MindgardenMedia podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. It's another episode about Bigfoot. And this time it's something you brought to the table, something you saw. I don't know if it was this year or years ago, but we're going to discuss something you actually saw on YouTube.
YouTube, I know. And I think I saw it on maybe Amazon Prime originally. And it's just so out there. And it kind of brings together all of the different theories that are out there about strange things, high strangeness. And that's going to be the focus of this episode.
High strangeness?
Yeah, I heard that term a while ago, and I kind of liked it.
Okay, well, that's what we're going to call this episode then. Season 6, Episode 7, The Bigfoot Chronicles, High Strangeness is next on the Sandy and Toddcast.
Hey gang, we are Damon,
Sue, and Amy Lynn
from the Adelaide Park Paranormal Society.
Join us for each episode of the Apps Alchemy podcast as we take a deep dive into the world of the paranormal, cryptids, the occult, and more. We've seen, heard, and experienced almost everything, and now we're bringing it all to you.
Find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and anywhere you might find your podcasts. Apps Alchemy Podcast is a MindgardenMedia production.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
It is another Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And here we go. More Bigfoot talk.
More Bigfoot talk. We're almost at the end, Todd. This is episode 7. We have our season wrap up next week. Then we're going to take a few weeks off until the beginning of the year before we start season 7. But we'll probably throw a couple empathic carries in there and some odds and ends of things in between to keep everybody happy, content, and loving the Sandy and Toddcast.
You know, maybe what we should do is have a live cast in there somehow and bring back some of the people that we've had on our live cast, or choose one or two of them. You know, we could have a live cast with what's her name or what's his name and all that kind of stuff.
You know, that would be a lot of fun. And people actually ask me all the time, when are you guys going to do another live cast? Everybody loves Thirsty Thursday, by the way. And so maybe we should bring one or two back in between to kind of play a catch-up episode. I think everybody be excited. I know Aaron Mazza is driving me absolutely bonkers. They want to come back on. Maybe we can have Aaron come back on. Who knows? We can bring some of our oldies but goodies, our good friends
Maybe
back.
Drew would want to come on. Maybe we could have a Thirsty Thursday holiday edition and just, you know...
I would love it.
Talk
you know how
about
much I love
favorite Christmas movies or Christmas TV shows or whatever that is.
Well, you know how much I love Drew. So that would be fantastic.
Yeah, the guy has another baby and then all of a sudden he's you can't find him anywhere. He's nowhere to be seen.
But he's posting a lot of pictures of the baby, which I love. And the kids, all of the kids in general. And I love seeing the kids because they're great kids.
He's a good dad, and Carissa's a good mom, and they're just a really nice family. And the fact
I love them.
These people have kids, and then they're not available for fun. That's the only thing I have to say about it.
You know, I was just thinking about that the other day, not to go too long into it, but I was thinking about it the other day because we were kind of talking about plans for September when Dave and I come out. And I thought it would be great to get Keith together again because I absolutely adore him. And we all jammed in this tiny car after dinner that night and went over to see Drew and Carissa. Totally took them by surprise, the poor things. And they couldn't come out because they had the newborn. So maybe by September we'll be okay and they can come out again.
It's just another reason why I don't like kids. I mean, I do, but the truth of the matter is it changes people. It changes people and they care too much about the child and not enough about their friends and stuff like that. Listen,
It's
if I'm
true.
willing to go out with you and actually spend some time out in public with you, drop the fucking kid off at a babysitter's. Take advantage of it.
I'm doing like belly laughs because it's so true. I'm like, I feel the same way. And Drew thought he might be coming right up until the last minute, and then he just pulled out. So then we threatened to TP his house.
Yeah.
Which I still think we should have done.
I know we should have gone and gotten some toilet paper. And although paper towel could be fun too, just
it could be even,
only 5 rolls and just throw them up in the tree and see what happens.
Or we could just whip them at him when he comes out to have his craft ale on the porch.
Yeah, that would be fun too.
All right. So this episode is pretty interesting. I have been if you've been listening throughout the whole season, I've been sort of mentioning this documentary that I saw. I first saw it a few years ago. Then I watched it a couple more times recently. It's called Missing 411: The Hunted. It is a documentary film by David Paulides, who is actually an ex-cop. And he has done several of these movies, written several books over the years about the fact that there are there's many missing persons cases in the national parks in the United States. The U.S. National Park Service, or NPS, doesn't directly collect data, and I thought this was so interesting, does not directly collect data on how many visitors disappear in the wilderness or backcountry in their parks. So the answer to the question as to how many are actually missing or have gone missing over the years is actually unknown. Paul Paulides estimates that there are over 1,600 unexplained disappearances in North America alone. Now, that's just North America. If search and rescue parties are unable to locate the missing people, there are no records required to be kept by the NPS about the missing person case or the circumstances surrounding the event.
That's a little odd.
It's just chaotic. Like, there's no way of knowing. And if they do a search and rescue, they don't know eventually, in a lot of cases, whether the people were found or not found, because then it gets taken over by other entities. So it's just chaos. When the remains of the missing are found again, there are no records required to be maintained. So they could do a search and rescue. A year later, remains could be found, and they're not required to even keep track of remains being found.
So what, they could just dump them off in a dumpster if they wanted to?
They have no way of knowing, like, there are no real statistics. There's just estimates. So there could literally be thousands of disappearances over the years, and nobody knows for sure. Why this is the case, I have no idea. Now, this is interesting, though. Statistics indicate that Lake Mead, Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and Rocky Mountain are the 4 parks that people are most likely to run into trouble. But of course, there are parks with the greatest number of visitors. These are the parks with the greatest number of visitors or with dangerous terrain or water. But there are plenty of other ones, too. So I'm watching this documentary, and he goes through a bunch of different missing persons cases and how odd they are. One of them is a man his last name was Messick. And he disappeared in an area just north of Albany, New York, and Horicon, New York. And that's sort of between Albany and Lake George area. And this was in 2015. He was 82 years old. He was a hunter. And he went out he had been hunting for decades upon decades. They went out to this one area. It was his son and his friends, and then a couple of his older friends. And the older men were told to sit on rocks with their guns and everything. And then the younger men would look for the deer and drive them towards them. And so, long story short, the man just disappears into thin air. Like, they have no idea where no body has ever been. As a matter of fact, it was just recently, a few weeks ago, the 7th anniversary of his disappearance. They have no trace. And the interesting thing about it is that the FBI actually came in on it, which the FBI doesn't do missing person cases unless it's children. This was an 82-year-old man. They never found any clothing. There was never his weapons. never found anything indicating where this man could have gone. I mean, there was a lake nearby. They dragged the lake several times. They're just absolutely into thin air. His older friend, who was sitting a ways down at a different area waiting for them to drive the deer through, actually said that he had heard some unusual noises that sounded almost like a clanking, a metallic sound, something he said he had never heard before, and almost like a door slowly shutting. And at the time, he didn't think too much, just that he had never heard anything like that in the woods before. They weren't near any kind of civilization per se, just an old back logging road. And so when he appeared in the documentary, he seemed very, very disturbed by the whole thing, what he had heard, the fact that his friend was missing, and it's just very mysterious. So they happen everywhere. A lot of times it's hunters. It's not just national parks, although I believe that this was part of the Adirondack Park, this area, but it happens all over the place. And one of the cases that I wanted to talk about today, because it sort of embodies a lot of the theories that are out there. And this one of the whole documentary really hit me the hardest because it is so incredibly strange. It's just strange. There's nobody missing, but it sort of ties in a lot of the speculation and the strange things that go on around the documentary. So it's called the Sierra Camp case. It's very well known in the Bigfoot paranormal sort of circles. There's a hunting camp that dates back to the 1950s in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. Now, that's on the sort of mid to upper east part of California, not far out of Yosemite National Park. I think it's less than 50 miles outside of Yosemite, where a lot of people have gone missing over the years. The camp is about 6,000 feet elevation, and you hike in about 8 miles from civilization. So a lot of people, when they hike in that area, which not many do, because Todd, you and I have talked previously about how barren, there are so many parts of the wilderness in the United States that's untouched.
Right.
This is the perfect example. They take pack horses and mules a lot of times when they would go in. It's basically so hidden that if you don't know where it's at, you'd never know it was there. The landscape changes from year to year, and so it's really difficult for someone out there for the first time to find it. They wouldn't have even known that it existed. You'd never be able to find it unless you knew where you were going. They would usually, like I said, bring the pack horses in with them because it was an 8-mile hike through rocky, rough terrain. And to be able to carry that stuff 8 miles in would be completely difficult. Ron Moorhead started coming up to the camp in 1971. The 4 original members of the 70s camp were Ron Moorhead, Warren and Lewis Johnson, and Bill McDowell. There's lots of deer and bear, plenty of fresh water springs, and absolutely beautiful landscape. So very plentiful deer and bear. They would come out on their hunting trips and never leave without a deer. It was just a tradition for them in the 70s to go up every year. Now, it's important to know that they're a very sober camp. There was no drinking or drugs allowed. They were all very professional men. They kept everything that was going on there, whatever it was, to themselves for a very, very long time, because we've seen that stigma before where, you tell somebody something and they think you're crazy.
Right.
But they also didn't want to ruin the very pristine area that they were in. They didn't want people knowing, not because they wanted what was going on to themselves, but because they knew that if they were to speak of it, everybody would want to go there.
Exactly.
And they just didn't want that. Now, Ron stopped hunting in the 70s, but he continued to come up to the camp every year for 49 years. Every year he would come back, even though he wasn't hunting. Strange things would happen each year at the camp, mostly in the evening or around dusk. They really didn't know what they were dealing with, but they knew that once the sounds started, that they should go into their shelter because this was when things would start. The first time Ron heard anything was later in 1971. He came up with the guys, and they were sitting by the stove, and they started hearing a bunch of grunts and whoops. Now, they built a shelter for when they went up. It kind of looked like a teepee. They had like there were 3 or 4 different large trees almost in a circle. And they took logs and put them upright against the trees and tied them together. And they bound them all together and then used a huge log as the door. So they would attach a cable to the huge log so that they could pull the door open and close the log up and down with the wire attached. And of course, they slept with their guns. So you have to remember, you've got all these guys with loaded weapons sleeping in this log thing that they've made at night. So every evening when they'd hear the sounds, that's when they knew it was time to get in the shelter. Whatever it was, they knew it was very, very big. They knew that it was huge. And Ron says that every single time they'd sort of just wait for something to come in after them, and they'd have to shoot their way out. That was what they all thought in their mind, that eventually whatever was out there was going to come after them, and that's why they had their guns ready to go every night. It never did, though, which is so strange. And they never actually saw anything. After a while, they started making recordings. They'd interact with them, too. They'd sort of mimic their sounds and calls. So they would stand in the camp.
I don't know if I would do that. Like, I think I would just shut my mouth because, you know, if you're making calls and stuff, and maybe, you know, like when people try and speak a foreign language and they don't know it very well and they say something and they say the wrong thing, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like this, you know, they might be going into the air, which is like some sort of come, you know, have sex with me call. Exactly. And then this monster comes out and, you know.
You don't know what you're doing. And you know, and you tease me about it all the time that I have no fear. But, you know, the more I get into this season, the more, I don't know if it's fear, but the more hesitation I tend to have. Like if I put myself in these situations, I'm like, would I really be doing this? Like, I don't know. But again, back then, I think it was right at the beginning. Don't forget, the Patterson-Gimlin film was in 1967. This wasn't that long afterwards. It was sort of looked on as maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. There's this fascination with it. And they just didn't know what was going on. They didn't have that same thought process that maybe we do today, you know, with all of the more scientific research available to us and the different things that we can do. Because I thought about that. I'm like, are these guys crazy? And they literally would. Like there was like a little ridge near the camp and there was a creek. And so they could hear these things, literally these creatures on the other side of the creek. They were talking to each other and then talking to them. And it's just fascinating. So I just grabbed a little bit of an audio clip of some of the noises that they recorded over the years. I cleaned it up a little bit because it was pretty raw. And this was from Ron Moorhead's. I want to give him ample credit for this. This was part of one of Ron Moorhead's recordings with his friend Al Berry over the years of them sort of talking to these creatures at night. Now, I will put Ron Moorhead's website in the show notes for this week, and I will also put the link for the sounds, the full sounds on YouTube, and also the documentary on YouTube in the show notes this week. But this is just a small snippet of what Ron Moorhead recorded one of the nights at camp.
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks. It's a hard act to follow.
It sounds like he talks to us and they talk to each other.
Yeah. Right there, I just seen movement right through there.
Okay, so I have a few things to say.
Uh-huh.
And I can summarize it in one statement. No fucking way. Okay, like,
I
no.
I know.
Like, I don't know if those are Bigfoot talking, but something is. And, you know, if it's a lost tribe of some, you know, humans or aliens, or I don't know. But I'll tell you what, okay, like, we've investigated ghosts and energies and all that shit. And there are times when you go, holy shit, I've never experienced that before. If I experienced that, I can tell you right now, just listening to it, I would be pissing my pants.
Oh, my God.
And probably soiling myself. And running down the fucking track home. I'll tell you that right now. I'd be gone.
And what's so strange about it is that they're 8 miles away. Now, like I said, this camp is so far in the wilderness that unless you knew where you were going, you would not know where you were.
Right.
You would not know how to get there. So for somebody to go in there 8 miles just to mess with people, not knowing when they're going to be going camping and when they're not, it just doesn't even seem like it would be feasible. Like, it's just not something. And those I mean, to me, it really does sound like sort of part human and part animal all together. I mean, okay, so Ron and his team, now don't forget, they recorded starting in 1971. They started recording these. And again, I cleaned it up a little bit because it was pretty raw and I wanted it to be able to play really well for the show. But they were recording these in the 1970s.
Right.
1970s. And so Ron and his team, they really wanted some sort of scientific validation for the recordings and what they experienced. So they submitted them to Dr. R. Lynn Curlin, professor of electrical engineering at the University of Wyoming. The analysis said that the sounds were made by a creature physically larger than a man, around 7'3" to 8 feet, based on pitch and sound. There was more than one creature recorded, and they seemed to be stepping over each other as if in conversation. Now, the frequencies themselves were not in human range. Their vocal range is much greater than that of humans, and the sounds were not altered in any way. They determined the sounds had not been altered in any way. The tape was truly authentic. They could not have been altered the way that they needed to be back in the 1970s. Now, today, because we have digital...
Right, we could do all that stuff
We could
easily.
do anything we wanted. But in the 1970s, there was absolutely no way for them to have done what it sounds like artificially. So over the past several decades, many scientists and researchers have analyzed the tapes. All of them have come back to pretty much that same conclusion. There is no way that they could have been played with, altered. I mean, this is truly authentic. Ron says that they never really understood why it was happening. He wasn't sure if these creatures felt that the hunters were in their territory and were trying to scare them. But for some reason, he always felt like they were just mostly observing them. Just as Ron and his friends were trying to figure out what they were almost trying to figure out what Ron and his friends were, and sort of kind of just observing them and seeing what was going on. Every single time I hear that audio, I get the chills, not exaggerating, especially that part where they're just jabbering to each other and then mimicking back and forth. It almost is ape-like. It almost is human-like. I just don't know how to explain it. I couldn't explain it to somebody if I was telling the story without playing the audio. That's why I needed to play the audio. It's just so unusual. Now, there were other unusual things, too. One night, they heard what sounded like a huge tuning fork over their camp. Just, you know that sound when you hit the tuning fork and it kind of has that metallic? Yes.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I was talking about the Messick case from New York State a little while ago. And the other hunter that was with the missing man, Mr. Messick, said that he heard sort of a metallic sound as well. That's happened several times throughout the different cases that people will say they hear weird sounds. Then all of a sudden that tuning fork sound just disappeared. Another time they were in their shelter and it sounded like their camp was being torn apart, that pots and pans were being thrown everywhere, things were being broken. But when they came out to check on it the next morning, everything was fine. Nothing had changed. It was all the same way they had left it the night before. Ron heard what sounded to him like a car door slam one time. Again, 8 miles into the wilderness. There are no cars in the wilderness. The hunters saw that, this is very interesting. The hunters saw one time what looked to be lights, orbs, and a large moving, intelligently controlled blue orb moving beyond the trees one time. In 2016, Ron and his wife were camping there for 3 days, and they saw a whitish streak of light about 3 to 5 feet long, sort of like a rod, like he described it as almost like a lightsaber, slowly and intelligently move through the trees surrounding the camp. Then it just moved on and disappeared. In 2014, the U.S. Forest Service discovered the camp, and they made the hunters tear it down and take the stove, etc. So it's basically just a clearing at this point. All of the logs that were used for the shelter are still there. The door is even still there, but they can't use it anymore. The ones who know about it still come up to hunt. Ron to this day won't release the location because he says it's very pristine and beautiful. He doesn't want it ruined. He's been asked to bring people up there many times, but he declines. He still goes to the camp to this day, as do some of the other hunters and their offspring. And Ron says that he still comes because of the mystery that surrounds it. And he's actually made this his calling in life, his career in life. He's dedicated his life to these recordings and the things that they found and the things that have happened up there. Still to this day, have never been able to capture a picture of anything. They stay pretty far away. And of course, I guess if I'm sitting there and a white streak of light slowly passes through the trees in front of me, my first thought isn't grab my phone, especially when you're an older gentleman and an older lady, you're more watching what's going on. So I get it. But even back then, they didn't get anything. They weren't able to. They could hear them, but they couldn't see them. So that's the Sierra Camp case, Todd, and it's really strange. And like I said, you can get more recordings if you go on YouTube and you can watch the documentary. It's very interesting.
I think again, we always talk about there's so much stuff that goes on around us that we don't see, we don't understand, and we poo-poo and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what I would do if I encountered that stuff.
I don't know. It's scary.
I'm comfortable if I experience something, hunting energy and all that kind of stuff, right? If you're investigating and something happens that shouldn't happen in our everyday life, you can kind of go, ooh, wow, what was that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there may be a part of you that goes, what the fuck did I just encounter?
Right.
But that, to me, this whole story, even listening to the voices and stuff like that and the sounds, the first thing that comes to mind, you hear the tuning fork and now there's lights. What are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with Bigfoot? Are we dealing with some sort of alien? Or is Bigfoot alien? Is alien Bigfoot? Listen, there's been discussions over the years that aliens and ghosts are also somehow tied together. I mean, there's so many different things you could try and place here. This is a huge puzzle that you lay out on Christmas Day and you start working on, and you're not done on the puzzle in front of the fireplace for years to come. We just don't know. But holy shit, if you hear that stuff, if you hear these stories and you don't go, well, there's something else out there other than, Joe down the street and Larry and Sandra and all that kind of shit that we see every day.
Yeah.
Come on.
The beauty of this story is that it does kind of encompass everything.
Yeah.
Aliens. It encompasses the paranormal. It encompasses Bigfoot. Like I said, everything except pretty much the ground sloth theory is involved in this case. And the documentary itself is really interesting to watch. It's very riveting. However, in the actual missing cases, if you go onto YouTube and you watch more about each individual case, there are a lot of details that are left out that don't make it perhaps as mysterious as the documentary makes it sound. But this one is, while there's nobody missing per se, this one, Ron Moorhead, for 50 plus years, has real documentation of what's going on here.
I'm really interested by the instance where they thought their camp was being torn up and there's stuff flying around. They're hearing all this stuff and they walk out and nothing's different.
And it's
reminds me so much of when you hear, like, in an investigation, glass breaking and nothing's broken, or you hear a door slam but there's no doors to slam, or no doors were closed. It reminds me almost of like residual energy too.
Yeah,
but how does that tie into Bigfoot, or, I don't know. It's just, it's strange.
I was just going to say that incident alone kind of shoots the Bigfoot theory out of the water. I'm like, how is that a Bigfoot issue? Like, how would Bigfoot come in, ruin everything, and then make it better again?
Listen, maybe they're just very cautious about how they, trample through somebody's camp. I don't know.
They're very courteous, Big Feet. I love using Big Feet. So anyways.
Too.
But for me, we've investigated plenty together. We know that I'm a very calm investigator. I don't get too rattled by many things. There's not much that rattles me. I think that in all of our time together, maybe once was I ever rattled. That was the Ed Gein experience that I had. Other than that, I don't get rattled. Oh, and she was rattled.
She was shaking and crying. I was crying. Yeah, it was, the people that were standing around us at the gravesite watching us do this were just, there
was nobody there. It was just you and Dave watching me.
Oh, you didn't notice the crowd that had come over to watch you weep by,
no.
What's her name's gravestone? What was her name? Edna? Elvira?
Augusta,
that's right.
It's funny, though. The crying wasn't even me being shaken up. The crying was actually, just as an aside, the crying was actually what I felt. Like, the crying came through me when I touched the stone. It didn't happen with the other stones. It was like this void of sadness. And that's why I started crying. I wasn't shaken. I was shaken up by what happened, believe me. But it was so weird. But the point being, I don't get frazzled by things in the paranormal world that much.
No, real life fucks you up more than the paranormal world.
I know, right? How funny is that? But it's true. But this would really, I went
to the refrigerator for a carrot, and I'm out of carrots.
I'm crying about it. Todd, what am I going to do? I can't call Walmart yet. They won't deliver till tomorrow. But yeah, so it's just, it brings into account a lot. And one other thing I did want to talk about is the guy who made this documentary was on a podcast not too long ago. And this was an interesting theory. He's made a few of these documentaries about hunters too. And the people who were going to produce one of his films sent him to a physicist, and I can't remember what kind of physicist it was, in Wisconsin, believe it or not, to speak to him about things. And this physicist confirmed to him that scientists over the years are pretty scientifically sure that there are such things as portals.
Yeah.
Time slip portals.
Yeah.
Just like they know that there are wormholes. They know that there are black holes. They know that there are these things. And that the government does a lot of experimentation with things like this because for defense. there is a high possibility that some of these people disappearing, because how do you know where there is one and where there isn't one for sure? They could be anywhere. One of the other things that they showed on this documentary, and I won't give a lot of it away, was a woman who was hunting on her own land. She was up in a tree stand and encountered something in the tree, moving in the trees nearby, like sort of jumping from tree to tree, that looked almost like saran wrap to her. That was the best way she could describe it, like a huge piece of saran wrap that kind of, almost like Predator, you know, that movie Predator, it kind of like made things wavy.
Yeah.
And it was moving around the trees. And it sort of makes you think, like, what is the military? What is the government? If these things are a possibility, what are they doing? Do they have control over what they're doing? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but anything is really possible. We know that the government has been doing god-awful experiences on soldiers and creatures and animals for years and years that are top secret. We know these things now. What are they doing? Are they doing something? Is that why there are so many disappearances, like into thin air? We don't know. We don't know. And I thought that was very interesting that a physicist himself would tell this man these things were possible. So
here's the thing. And here's the truth from just an average guy who has investigated paranormal, does believe there's energies that we don't understand, believes in the woo-woo, even though I don't embrace it 100% because I don't feel like I have time to and all that kind of stuff.
I don't have time.
Can you imagine? Here's the thing. Humans are not equipped to understand it all at this point in our lives. As these meat socks that we live in, we're not able to process this. If we someday said, if they finally said, the world said, listen, we're going to tell you we're going to tell you the secrets. And they sat down and there was a fucking, slide presentation and they showed it to us. Our fucking brains would explode and ooze out of our ear. And we couldn't handle it.
No.
Because we're too fucking simple. We're too simple to try and address that. I mean, here again, we still have people who don't believe that there are spirits and energy. And although we've never said that we're trying to make you believe it, it happens. It's a real thing. We can't understand that. We can't even understand, the process of what humans have gone through in our history in the world. There's a lot of that information that is not correct and not really told to us. And we have people that are trying to stop, the truth about the history of certain individuals and certain races in our world and all that kind of stuff. People who deny what happened to Jewish people. I mean, we've got all that. We can't even deal with actual stuff in history that has taken place. Can you imagine if we found out about this other stuff? It would kill us. We would fucking implode. And that would be the end of everything. And the people in power would have nothing to be in power over anymore. So
one more thing before we get to our spiel and wrap up for the week. Last night, I was watching a documentary on Amazon Prime. And
I don't know where you find time to do all this documentary watching on Amazon Prime.
I actually had some time this week because it's quiet work week. I was busy the beginning of the week and now I'm like quiet.
Yeah.
So I actually have time to like do things. Plus the Rangers haven't played that much this week. So we've had more time to just watch TV instead of watching a game.
So here's what I choose to watch. Old Cagney and Lacey episodes. And you're out there watching documentaries.
Well, I love documentaries. I was watching, ironically enough, a documentary called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Oh. So, yeah. Do you know what one that is?
I've heard about it. I've not actually seen it.
It was very interesting. I didn't finish it's like 2 hours long. I didn't finish the last half hour. But the basic point of it is that the government, let's put it this way, and I know we're talking about aliens, but we don't know what Bigfoot actually has to do with things. But if the aliens wanted to take us out, especially now after we've shot at them, we've even the government admits that there's something, that there are UFOs, that there are aliens. If we've shot at them, if we've set off, atomic bombs and things, if they wanted to harm us at this point, they would harm us at this point. And I thought that was a valid point. If you think about it, these are civilizations that are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years more advanced than we are.
Yeah,
they went here a lot longer than we have. We're babies.
and stupid. Babies and stupid.
We don't understand the higher consciousness. We don't understand how things work. We don't, and so many things on the show, and believe me, I'm just as skeptical. I consider myself to be a healthy skeptic, but so many things about what they were saying actually were common sense, and they made sense. Like, why would they be harming us? Why aren't they here to help us? Why aren't they coming here to observe us and to make sure that we don't kill ourselves?
Maybe they are. Who knows, right?
Ruin ourselves. And that the government actually, and I don't know how far this goes in the truth scale, but that the government over the years has actually tried to instill that fear in us, because the ones that want to remain in power can only remain in power if we're afraid of what's out there.
Of course. Well,
right?
Listen, that's how countries are governed, through fear.
Exactly.
Fear others from other countries, fear others of different skin colors, fear, that's what it is. We know that.
Exactly. And that's the whole point, is they, and the allegations in the documentary are that the government is actually doing the cattle mutilations. They're kind of staging this whole thing to make us afraid of them, rather than thinking that they're coming to try and be there and help us.
I can't go too far down that road.
I know.
Because I would lay awake at night worrying about it. And I don't get enough sleep the way it is.
But that's the general idea.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, what does the government know? I mean, and we're not talking about the president. We're not talking about Congress. We're talking about these rogue departments, these rogue programs that are in the deep state that nobody even knows about. They're not telling the president of the United States what they're doing. He doesn't know anything. So, interesting thoughts. But I thought that this case was interesting because it sort of brings in everything that is a possibility into one place. And just definitely something to think about.
All right, let's do our spiel real quick.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called The Empathicary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. MindgardenMedia is their latest project, where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like MindgardenMedia on Facebook, or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
All right, so you had your sound bite, and then I mentioned watching reruns of Cagney and Lacey, so I had to play their theme. Back when TV had themes and a little video to show you what the show was about, You know what I'm saying?
Yep. I watched Cagney and Lacey.
Yeah.
I watched Cagney and Lacey too. Take me back to those days. I don't even watch TV anymore.
I know. Well, I can't either.
I don't watch TV.
I can't either.
There's nothing I watch. I don't watch sitcoms. I don't watch anything anymore except documentaries and shows about the paranormal. That's pretty much it.
So I watched a little story about the theme song from Cagney and Lacey. Let me just throw this in here. I know it has nothing to do with Big Feet. But so the guy that was hired to do the theme, okay, CBS at that time had a comedy show on. And then right after it was going to be Cagney and Lacey, which, by the way, was deemed not a cop show. It was a show about two women who happened to be cops, which I think is brilliant.
Wow.
But they said to the guy writing the theme, listen, we don't want this to sound like a cop show because we're coming off a comedy. We want somebody who's just watched this comedy, which has viewers, to stick around. So the guy who wrote the theme had to have that in his mind. It couldn't sound like a cop show theme. It had to sound like a theme that could be a comedy, could be a drama, could be whatever. And so that's what and for me, there's a lot of great TV themes, and I could talk about TV themes forever. This is one of the best of all time. It was just very, very good. So,
do you know what that reminds me of? Do you remember that song "Sooner or Later"?
Sooner or later, love is gonna get you. Sooner or later, love is gonna win. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't it kind of remind you of that?
It has a little bit of that in there. You're right.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
See?
The Grassroots is the band that.
Yeah. Yep.
How did you know that song, by the way?
Because I know music. I don't like.
No. How did you know that song?
But Dave.
I know. Your husband.
Dave is like the walking music encyclopedia.
Yes, he is.
And so we'll hear, like, he'll play a lot of 70s when we're in the car. And, you know, sometimes 60s, but mostly 70s. And then I'll kind of switch it up and go to 80s, 90s. But we listen to a lot of it. And that's just a song that I always like that song. So
let me just look. Let me just see what year that's from. That song came out in 1971. And the reason why I asked you about it, because I thought maybe you'd remembered it from like Smooth 70s, from doing that.
Oh, that's station. Possible too. Well, yeah. But I knew that song probably before Smooth 70s.
I see.
Which I miss, by the way. I love Smooth 70s.
Yep. Well, it's still around. We don't do it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that kind of just reminds me, and that'll happen to me a lot. I'll say, Dave, don't you think that this song sounds a little bit like this song? You know, and I love it. But he's a walking encyclopedia. So all
right, we'll move on here. One more episode left of this season, and then we'll take a little break and whatever. So
we'll do a quick wrap up next week, probably an abbreviated version of the episode to wrap up the season, and then we're going to take a few weeks off, enjoy the holidays. But we'll probably do an empathic carrier too in between. And on to season 7. Season 7, we're going to concentrate on some of the maybe lesser known, at least for mine. I picked out a few of my own haunted houses in the United States.
Okay.
So maybe we'll concentrate and tell the stories of some of these houses.
Love it. So that's what's coming down the line. Remember to tell a friend about the podcast and all that good stuff too. So.
Yeah, and be sure to like and subscribe and review us, just because that really helps us get bumped up in the category much faster. If you just give us, a few words, give us 5 stars and a few nice words about it, and it'll really help us out a lot. So thank you guys for everything.
In your review, just say one is hot, the other's a hot mess. And that's all you have to say.
That's all you have to say. We'll let you decide which is which.
I think we know. Okay. Until next time, bye.
Bye.